couple of other actions. So till now we have seen actions like count, collect, take, and save as text file, save as sequence file, save as new payload file, like those kind of actions we have seen. So we have a couple of other actions also. So here you can see num RDD. Num RDD is basically RDD having numbers integer 1 to 10. They're in line number 1. And we say num RDD.take sample false 5. Okay. So let's see how this function looks like in the documentation side. So what it says, so take sample function returns a fixed size sampled subset of the RDD. But the method should only be used if the resulting array is expected to be small, and as all this data is loaded into the driver's memory. So which is obvious. So one point, if you remember, we discussed about the collect and the take function. So what's the difference we saw at the time? So in take function, it's parameterized. We specify the number of records we want to fetch from that data. So basis that those many records get extracted from there. And basically we get a list of those values. And the moment you are saying list of values means where it is coming. It's coming to the driver's memory. Okay. So we have discussed like when your Spark program is under execution. So what it is doing, it's basically two types of program, like driver program and worker program. Okay. So driver program is what? Driver program is basically when so the piece of code where you are creating the Spark context object or Spark session object, or the code which you are writing to create RDDs, create data frames. So those lines of code are called driver program. Otherwise, we don't create separate files, driver.py, worker.py. We don't write like that. Rather, we need to understand it in this way. So whatever code you write, suppose you're writing a 500 lines of code, your bigger ETL pipeline. So every other statement, what you written there in those 500 lines code, and which are nothing but creation of Spark session object or Spark context object, or creating data frames, RDDs, accumulators, broadcast variables, all this piece of code are coming under and are called as driver program. Okay, so driver basically executes, or the machine which hosts your which runs the job, or which basically, so it's work in this way. Like one type of process is understanding your code, breaking it into multiple tiny tasks, what we discussed earlier, task at the smallest unit of execution, and make them execute by all your cluster resources. So that is one piece. And another piece of process, which is basically actually doing the processes, means we are applying map transformations, executors. Means one is supervisor, another is worker. Okay, so you can say the supervisor program is nothing but the driver program. It understood your code. It just scanned through line by line. It understood the code. It understood like what are the ETL you are trying to do. Then it broke it into multiple tasks. What you remember earlier, what we discussed, your application will be broken into jobs to stages to tasks. And this task will be executed by all these worker machines on top of the different executors. And the driver is basically, or the supervisor will just supervise it. It will just assign this task to different executors to get executed, and keep track if it is finished. If it is finished, assign a new task to the same executor and all this. Okay, if a task failed, like how to restart that task in another machine or another executor, and all these things happen in the backend by the supervisor or the driver, or we call it as a driver program. And the worker program is, it's doing the actual transformation. Okay, you're applying map, filter, and all this. So this actual transformation is being done through the worker programs. Okay, so take function returns a list of 10 or 10, 5 or 20, whatever number you specified, that many number of records as a list. The moment you say list means what? It's a standalone collection. It's no more a distributed collection. The moment you call RDD.take 10, so it just took first 10 records and created a RDD, created a list out of it. Now it's a standalone list. Then on which machine that standalone list will reside? That's also we need to understand, right? So once you created a list, so where that list will reside? That list is something that has to reside in some machines, right? That list has to be resided in a machine, right? So which one is that machine? that machine is nothing but the driver program. Okay, just remember the machine where your that result is uh, uh, resulted, or that output is resulted. So that machine is nothing but the driver program. That means your driver program should be having enough memory to hold that much of data. So why I'm talking about this? So take the other example, collect function. Collect function also does similar thing, but it doesn't take any parameter how many records to collect. Rather, collect function doesn't take any parameter. If you call rdd.collect and your RDD is a billion record which is distributed across 20 machines, the moment you call rdd.collect, the entire data got converted to a single standalone Python collection. Again, same story, that single large collection should be residing in a single computation memory because it's now a standalone collection. It's not a RDD anymore. That standalone collection should be resided in a single machine. And that machine is nothing but the master node or the driver program where it is running. And pretty sure like that doesn't have enough memory to hold this huge amount of data. So it will fail. It will give you out of memory exception. Okay, just remember we have to carefully use collect function. We should always avoid calling collect function where we know that the data is really huge, and if we call collect function, huge collection, distributed collection will be converted to a standalone collection, and your driver will fail because it doesn't have enough memory to store or hold it into its memory. Okay, so that's there. So a take function has different variants. The same story what we have discussed earlier. You remember one function, naturally automatically you will remember a couple of other functions. We give the example like map function has variants like flat map, map partitions with index, and all this. Similarly, take function has different variants. So, or in fact, like take, collect, these are all single family of functions. Collect, take sample, take ordered, all these things. Okay. So take sample is a function. What it does, it basically take random sample of records. Okay. Take function just give the initial few records. It can pick any random partition. Okay. It can pick any random partition, and it will just select. It will select the first n number of records. But whereas take sample function will basically collect values from different partitions, because we have specified say take sample 100 records or 1000 records. So it will fetch data from all these machines, all these partitions, and it will give you a list of that values. Okay, so you might be wondering like why it is required and all. So the reason is obvious. Like take function, you may get some biased records. Maybe initial few records are basically from the current dates data. You are doing some analysis on the transaction data or the sales data. You extracted it into your HDFS, and now you read that data and created a RDD out of it, and you call take function. So by default, what happened? Data just got uploaded to your HDFS in a chronological order, the way it is appearing in the warehouse. So what happened? Like the last record is the last partition's data is basically 10 years old data, and the current partition's data is basically current month's data. Suppose you want to see the data from all these across months or customers who have done transactions across different years, different quarters, different months. So in that case, you can use sample function. Okay, most of the time when you work with the data science team closely, they will ask you this kind of information. They will say, "Boss, this data is really huge. I can't do any machine learning model on that because I'm doing it using Python scikit-learn, which is standalone. So can you give me a sample 1 million record or 10 million record?" So you can do that. Okay, you can call take sample 10 million, and you can get a data, and you can write it back to you can write it as a CSV file, and then write it. Then you can share that data with them, and they can start with their analysis. So that's the whole reason of which we use take sample function. Okay, it has a couple of parameters you can see with replacement. It's a Boolean value, true or false. So while taking the sample, you are saying whether you are looking for some duplicate records or duplicates are allowed or not. Okay, if you say with replacement true, that means it will allow duplicates. And if you say false, so it will not allow any duplicates. Okay, that's how basically this happens. And the second parameter is num. How many sample records you want? 10 record, million record, 10 million record, that you can specify. And the third parameter is called seed value. Okay, seed is something like which has nothing to do with the data, rather it's basically the random number generation mechanism. Okay, so you'll see that. So seed is basically it decides the data points to be resulted from that text sample function. So let's see them one by one. First you call, oh God, what happened? So we are calling text sample function. We are saying text sample false with replacement false. Means we are saying we don't want duplicate records, and then we are saying 5. Okay. So what it will do, it will take random 5 records. Okay. 5, 1, 10, 2, 7, like that. So every time you execute, you will get a different sample. Okay. Every time you execute, you will get a different sample, isn't it? 5, 6, 2, 3, 7, like that. You can get a different sample. Then the num added a text sample. You are saying with replacement true. Okay, you are saying duplicates are allowed. So in that case, but again, it's not forcing. You're saying, since I'm fine with duplicates, then it may give you some duplicates or may not. Okay. Here you can see 7, 6, 4, 7, 5. Okay, 7 is duplicates. Here 5 is duplicate. You're getting different samples, but inside the sample, elements can duplicate. That is what with replacement. And here we are saying I don't want duplicates, but I'm fixing the seed value to 100. So here 5, 1, 6, 10, 4. Every time you execute, you'll get the same set of sample records. That's the use of this seed value. Okay, it's basically a random number generation mechanism. So if you're saying I want, if you're saying like I want 100 records, okay. So if I want 5 records, okay. So every time you call, this function by passing this seed value, it will always result into the same sample set. So what's the usage? So when you are working with the data science team, they will ask you to provide some sample data. You just generated that. Subsequent time also they can say, we want these additional columns, or can you just modify this column? It looks like this column is incorrect. Can you rectify it? Or can you update the logic for that? You do all this code changes and all this. Okay. So later they will say, make sure like you share us the same sample data set, not a different sample. Because you saw every time you call text sample function, it gives a different sample data. Okay, so if you again share a different sample data, so they may have to do a couple of more extra work to do their analysis. Rather, they've already done some analysis and they want to add some additional analysis to that data. So they just asked you to add a couple of columns. So if you use a fixed seed value during the first time, so second time also it will give you the same record with additional fields, of course. Okay, so you use a different seed value. Seed value is just a number. You can pass any number. Okay, I'm giving 400. So it will now create a different seed, different sample record. There it is 5, 1, 6, 10, 4. Now it is 6, 3, 2, 4, 8. 6, 3, 2, 4, 8. Every time you execute, you will get a same sample data set. Okay, like that. So that is about the take sample function. And the next one is basically take ordered function. As the name suggests, it will give you the data in a particular order. By default, the order should be there in the actual ascending order of the data. Okay, here you can say take. Here you're saying take ordered 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. It's giving the output. Okay, so but again, the data can be most of the time the data is not that straightforward. So in that case, you can optionally pass a logic, like on what basis you want to apply the order. Suppose it's a transaction data set. This data is having 20 columns each, and you want some first 1,000 records or 10,000 records. So in that case, what you can do, you can call take ordered function. Okay. You can call take ordered function, and you can call take ordered function, and then you can pass that custom logic also. Take ordered function takes the second parameter, optional parameter. Okay, so you can see this. Okay, key is none. Okay, key is basically here you are specifying on what key you are basically trying to apply the ordering. So here basically you can see here we are saying lambda x colon minus x. Here it is an RDD of numbers. So x represents a number or integer only. So you are saying minus of x. Okay, that's how basically I want to apply the ordering. It's reverse order. So the data remains as it is, but the ordering happens with the negative order. Okay, here basically we are saying 1 is less, then 2 is more, 3 is more than that, 4 is more than that. But now you can see the output is coming in the descending order. 10 is the highest element. Lesser than it, that is 9, lesser than that is 7, lesser than that is 6, like that. Okay, here it is happening in the negative order. Okay, and in the projects, and as you know, like you may not get the data pretty straightforward, like RDD of string or RDD of integers, like that. You will get RDD of tuples or RDD of record having multiple fields. Okay, so in that case, what happens? Like you have to make sure. In that case, what you have to make sure, like we do have. So in that case, what we generally do there, we specify. So RDD of tuples, say there's a transaction data having 20 fields. So each record is a tuple of 20 fields. Okay. So in that case, you can see, suppose this is a RDD of records having 2 elements each. Okay. First element is a tuple of 10, 2, second one is 2, 9, third one is 3, 4. Like that, we have RDD of tuples. From that, we are calling take order 6. You want to take the first 6 records, lambda negative of the first element. Now X is of type tuple, and you access the elements of a tuple through the square bracket. Okay, X within square bracket 0. This is how you can access the elements of a tuple. This is how you can access the elements of a tuple. So you can say X colon minus of X of 0. Okay, in this way you can basically specify the logic of the column. So X of 0 is nothing but the first element, and you are saying minus of X of 0. That means you are saying apply the ordering basis the reverse order of the first element, isn't it? So if you execute this, you see, so first element is 10, then 5, then 3, then 2, then 2. Like this, things happen. Okay, so that's how basically things happen. And similarly, here you can see you have applied the ordering basis both the elements and the negative order. But that also you can do. So you can see within parentheses, we have specified minus of X of 0, minus of X of 1. Pretty much similar output you are getting. Okay. That's how basically you can think of applying. You can read some sample data or some ordered data. Okay. Suppose you have been asked to do some analysis on the highest revenue generating products or highest revenue generating customers. So then you can have the data in this way, and you can extract the, say, first 1,000 records. You want to run some different campaigns for them. So you can extract the first 1,000 record in this logic. Okay. Like that. Okay, that is there. So the next thing is caching and persistence. This is again a very, very important concept. Okay, how we do the caching and persistence. So here comes with a very good concept. We are just, let's try to understand. Suppose somebody has given you some question. Say a person just said you have created a RDD1 is equal to Spark context. That text file, and you provide a path here. Spark context or text file that path here, and so a Spark context or text file path here, and then you can say, then you can say like this, maybe dot map, and you pass some logic, and then dot filter. Okay, like that you have written this code, and now okay, so post that in the next line you have mentioned, say RDD2 or RDD1 dot reduce function, and then you said RD1 dot repartition dot map dot click. Okay, and say a hypothesis is, say a person says this line of code takes 1 hour to execute. Okay, and this takes 1 hour to execute, and this also take 1 hour to execute. So what do you think? How much total time it will take to execute? Any guess? This
3
line,
hours.
3 hours.
3 hours.
Any other guess?
1 hour.
1 hour. Any other guess? 1 hour, 3 hour. Any other guess? Why 3 hour and why 1 hour?
Because it runs parallelly, so all the 3 tasks executed simultaneously and takes 1 hour.
Okay, then why 3 hours?
So like like once this
Sorry?
transformation is performed, like after that it again performs action. Was like it first it executes first RDD, and after that once we have the result, then it performs the action, and then it again performs this transformation.
Okay, so let's try to understand back to our day 2 discussion by looking at this code. So suppose once you submit this application using Spark submit command, which we will see shortly, not shortly, rather after a few sessions, Spark submit, and you specify a whole bunch of parameters there. So it creates a new application ID, application underscore some chunk number underscore. So 3 times 4 times 0 1. Okay, like that it create an application ID this, and this application will be broken into multiple jobs, right? This will be broken into multiple jobs. So how many jobs it will create? Any idea? By looking at this piece of code, how many jobs will be created?
2 jobs.
By looking at this piece of code, what you forgot it again? What we discussed it multiple times. Remember, every time you submit a Spark application, a new application ID will be registered, and that application ID will be broken into multiple jobs. So it will be broken basis what? Number of action calls, right? Don't forget it.
Yeah.
How can you forget this? Every interviewer asks this question. Spark jobs execution model. Here we have 2 action calls, reduce function and collect. Okay, so that's 2 jobs. Okay, so it creates basically 2 jobs here. So this application will be broken into 2 jobs. And say total how many stages it will create now? How many stages? How many stages it will create? First job is reduce function. Okay, so let's try to simplify or just reformat the code how it looks like. So we are saying basically actions trigger the executions, right? That's why we are that's why we are calling them as jobs. Okay, jobs are nothing but different actions invoked in the backend, isn't it? So this is the first job, and this is the second job, right? So this RDD1 is nothing but this one. We can replace RDD1 in this way because as we discussed, it's not line by line execution. Rather, it breaks the application into multiple jobs, and then jobs will get executed, isn't it? Actually, in the backend, these 2 jobs are created, isn't it? This is job 1, and this is job 3. Okay, that's how basically this jobs are created, job 1 and job 2, and this is how basically the jobs are created, job 1 and job 2. So job 1 is nothing but reduce function, and job 2 is nothing but collect. So here this job is broken into how many stages?
Three stage.
Three stages.
How did you know 3 stages?
Map, transformation, filter.
So what are the definition of stage? What we discussed, like how the number of stages get decided.
It will be one stage.
It's one stage only. This is the number of wider transformations. These are all narrow. Map transformation is a narrow transformation. Filter is also a narrow transformation. It's a single stage job only. Okay. It's only one stage. Okay. This basically creates a one stage job only. How about the second job?
Two stages.
Two stage.
Correct. This would be your stage job. Because here you have called repartition function. So before repartition, everything is one stage. And after that, the rest of the things, after that only one map function. So that's again another stage. If you revisit again another wider transformation, then we can decide further subsequent stages. But here, one functions. So till that one stage, after that another stage. Okay. So that means total 2 plus 1, 3 stages, right? 3. Job 1 is having 1, job 2 is having 2, right? So that's basically how the number of stages get decided. Now, how many tasks? Assume like I read this data as 10 partitions.
So Siddharth,
Yeah, please.
hello. So like, is the transformation a stage?
So we have 2 type of transformation. In a given RDD class, we have 2 type of transformations. So let me just quickly recap. So inside RDD class, we have whole bunch of functions, and we have decided and we have discussed like these functions are broadly categorized into 2 types: transformations and actions. If a function returns a RDD, then this is called transformation. If a function doesn't return RDD, it can return anything else like list, like take function and collect function, take sample, take order. These are all returning list. These are all actions. And functions like save as text file, save as sequence file, save as Hadoop, new API Hadoop file. This returns nothing. Its return type is void. It doesn't return anything. So these are also stages. Like that. So if a function doesn't return, it's called action. And the transformations are again further divided into 2 types. Okay. So transformations are nothing but the functions which returns RDD. Again, these are of 2 types. Some functions are one-to-one transformation, like pretty straightforward, like map, filter, and all. Every time you apply map function or filter function, the function what you're passing as a parameter, that will be applied on one record at a time without looking at other records, because these are completely independent. You have each record is a string comma delimited transaction record. You want to extract the customer ID and transaction amount. So when we are doing this kind of activity on record 1, do you really need to care about 100th record, how it looks like? No, these are completely independent transformations. So these are called narrow transformations, very narrow, like they don't have to think about others. They are self-sufficient. These transformations are completely independent. And another type of transformations are called actions. For example, another type of transformations are called wider transformations. For example, you are calling repartition function, group by function, reduce by key function. So reduce by key function, you saw like we are using it to apply aggregations on basis certain key. Your data is of 10 partitions. First partition is having say 100 record. Customer ID has purchased some electronics product. Customer 2 has purchased some medicines, like that. We have a whole bunch of records in partition 1, partition 2, partition 3, partition 4, like all partitions. So when you are applying aggregations for customer ID 1, so customer ID 1 having multiple transactions appearing in multiple partitions. Even it's available only in a given partition, still, when you're applying this aggregation function, say sum or any aggregation function you are trying, it has to iterate through each and every record of that particular key. Then only it will be able to calculate the actual sum of transactions for customer ID C1. So that's why these are called wider transformations. It cannot happen independently on each record. It has to take care of all records sharing the same key. So that's why these are called wider transformations. The number of wider transformations appearing in a given job means job is what you saw, like a whole bunch of transformations following a action call. Just like you saw line number, this line number 19, reduce function is also an action and collect function is also an action. So these are creating different jobs. So job is nothing but a chain of transformations ends with an action. So this chain of transformation can have narrow transformations as well as wider transformations. Basis the number of wider transformations, the number of stages get decided. That's how basically Spark achieves fault tolerance and Spark achieves parallel executions. It's very, very important. Okay, you need to just remember this forever until you are into Spark. Okay, there's a very, very common question and very, very fundamental understanding we should possess. Okay, so basing the number of narrow.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So thanks for explanation.
Yeah, sure. So the number of wider transformations decides the number of stages. So we have discussed like job 1 is 1 stage, job 2 is 2 stages, like that. And we are saying we read this data as 10 partitions. So you are saying in this one is having how many functions? Text file, map, filter, 3 functions. So 3 into 10, that is 30 tasks. Okay, 30 tasks, because you have 3 transformation, 3 function calls, and you have 10 partitions each. In a very hypothetical scenario, you may get 30. It's not exact, but you may expect 30 transformations max. And this is having
50.
How many transformations? You can see this repartition function up to this part. Forget about the actions and how many stages and now. So you can see text file function, map, filter, repartition, map. 4 functions are there. So that means 40 tasks. Okay, like that. So you have total 40 plus 30, that is
70
tasks. Okay, so 30 plus 40, total 70 tasks. So this is how things happen in the backend, isn't it? That's how basically things happen in the backend. Okay, that's how basically things happens. Okay, that's how basically things happens in the backend. These many number of tasks get decided. Now, one thing you notice here, even though you have created an intermediate RTD, that is RT1, so it get computed twice. Okay, so when Spark deciphers the number of the lines of code what we have written, so what it does, it basically goes in this way. Okay, it basically identifies like how many how the code has been written, basis that it decides the different jobs and then it executes accordingly. Okay, so that's how basically things happen in the backend, and that's basically how things happens in the backend. A natural question comes to my mind, like how can I get rid of like multiple computations? First of all, can someone tell me, like, is it good to have like, or it's a good practice that Spark should execute the same thing again and again, or it's not? What do you think? Any suggestion? So why Spark has decided this execution model? Why do they want you to recompute the same thing again and again? Any idea? The reason you can see, like, you cannot compute intermediate data and store it in a variable. It doesn't work in that way. Why? Because of the obvious reason. Because what happens, like when you are working on this kind of large data sets, like a billions of records and all, so you can think like, is it practically possible to compute this intermediate data and store it in the memory? It's not, because you don't even have that much of memory to keep that data into the memory. So it should be always computed on the fly, and it should be flushed out from the memory. Okay, it should be always computed. It should be always computed from. It should be always computed from the from the data itself, and once the variable is no more referenced, it can be garbage collected. Okay, that's how basically we can think of. Okay, so that is how basically things go in the backend. That's how things go in the backend. So we have to make sure like the data is, so you can't just keep those values, intermediate values. Okay, so that's why the execution model has been defined in this way. Okay, it will keep on executing different tasks versus the data, and then again take the data from the previous stage output and again do the further computations. So it has already added this multiple hubs. Okay, it cannot compute everything in one shot. Okay, so that's why it's not very new. Like if you have some background in ETL projects or like ETL concepts, so you know, like means we always have multiple hubs in between. We never write a code as a single flow. We do it in multiple hubs. We read data from the source systems, persist it into the staging layer. Then we read the data from the staging layer, do the data cleansing, write it into a different set of directories saying these are cleansed data. Then you read the cleansed data, then do some transformations, write it into intermediate layer, intermediate directories. Then you read data from intermediate directories, do the final set of processings and update your final data mart. So naturally, means years before, from ages, we are developing these ETL projects in this manner. It's always a multi-hub application. It's in multiple stages it has to compute. Because if you just do it in a single job, what may happen? If something is broken, suppose you have written everything as a single hub, single application, single stop, one stop solution. So suppose it's taking 5 hours, 6 hours, and your job fails at the 6th hour or 5th hour, just before completing, just before 10 minutes of completion. So it failed. So you don't have any way to recover it. You have to again do the same thing from the beginning. But if you execute in this way, like compute it, persist it, compute it, persist it. In this way, suppose in multiple hubs, you store the data. If you failed in between, it's fine. You can recover it from the previous stage. You don't have to recompute. You don't have to spend again another 6 hours to recompute it. The previous output is already persisted. Then let's go and use that. Okay, that's how basically things happen in the backend. Now, that's how things happen in the backend.
See that one question I have
Yeah,
is
please.
here the tasks we had defined, right? Only narrow transformations will perform the will be defined to tasks, not the wider transformations.
No, task, everything create tasks. I'm talking about stage. Only wider transformation creates stages. Task you saw like basis the number of transformation calls and number of partitions, the number of tasks get decided. Stages are basis the wider transformations.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, that's what basically I'm saying. Like if you have this, this is how basically this thing has been decided, and so that's how basically the execution model is there. But optionally, sometimes when you are working on certain type of projects where, so most of the time some analytical projects where you have to create a single data set, or we call it sometimes master data set. On that master data set, you do calculate different matrices, and then you join them together. Finally, you have sales data, you have customers data, you have campaigns data, you have inventory data, you have all these informations are there. You read all these data separately, did the data cleansing, and then you merge them together as a single master data. Okay, and on top of that master data, you are calculating roughly 300, 400, 500 attributes or matrices. So in that case, don't you think like computing this huge master data again and again, that master data creation itself takes 2 hours, because you are doing a lot of data cleansing activities, joining activities, and all this, then you are calculating all these matrices. So in that case, what happens? No, this basically, it's not a good idea to recompute that again and again. Rather, we can save that data, okay, or we can keep that data in memory and then do the further processing if you want to run that application really fast. Okay, that's the reason because of which this caching concept came in. Okay, you can cache that data, intermediate data, and then that cached data can be used. Cache data means the moment you call rd.cache, it just keep that data entirely into the memory in the RAM of the cluster. Of course, with a cost, right? You should be having enough RAM to persist that data. You should be having a big enough cluster. Then only you can do that. Like all these points. Okay, so that's what you're saying. Like you have this. That's what we're saying. Like you have this. You have this. You have this RDD1. So here you what you can do, you can take out this code again. Oh, sorry. Oh. So you just refactor the code. So I'm giving it a new name, say test new.py. Here, instead of that, you are saying after doing the filter function, you are saying cache function. Cache is also a transformation because it also returns an RDD. So still the same analogy we are saying you have. So that means what is the total time it required to compute what we discussed last time. So that means the total time of execution is basically how much time. So this you see, sorry, still incorrect result answer. So we said Spark context or text file, then .map.filter.reduce. This piece take 1 hour and this piece take 1 hour. So 1 hour plus 1 hour, this is 2 hours. And same thing for this one also. So you calculate RDD1, that is 1 hour, and you calculate this one, that is also 1 hour. So 1 hour plus 1 hour, this is 2 hours. So in total, it become 4 hours. 2 hour plus 2 hour, this is 4 hours. Okay. So this particular job take 4 hours to execute. Okay, given this hypothesis. Okay, let's the same thing again. But with a modified version, we are saying cache function. So do you see like any difference happens in terms of job 1 and job 2? Or it's same? Only that before this filter function, we have dot cache function has been added. Okay, this cache function has been added. Apart from that, nothing else. So cache, we are saying it's again another transformation. So instead of 30 tasks, maybe it is another 10 tasks, that is 40 tasks. But what will happen once the first action has been called, that means cache has been executed. So it doesn't have to recompute the cache RDD. That means second job is nothing but RDD1. It doesn't have to recompute RDD1 because RDD1 is already computed in the previous job 1, and it has been put into the memory in the cache. Okay, that's why you don't have to recompute that. It's anyway has to stay there inside the first in the memory only, in the RAM only. Okay, so the number of stages still the same thing, and all the number of tasks are also same thing. But in terms of time of execution, so a couple of things has been changed. Here you are not computing. So the first one is taking, and if you are calculating, the first one is the first job takes 2 hours because this part is taking 1 hour and this part is taking another 1 hour. So 1 hour plus 2 hours, that is 2 hours. But the second job is not recomputing RDD1. So it's now reduced from 2 hours to 1 hour only. Isn't it? It's not recomputing the RDD1 because it's already available in memory. So in this case, the total time just got reduced from 4 hours to 3 hours.
Siddharth, I have one question here.
Yeah, please.
Till the cache it will take, suppose say that, think of that, till the cache it will take 1 hour. Okay. Reduce and repartition are taking another 1 hour and 1 hour. So why can't we make it this reduce and repartition as a parallel execution, so that
You
it will
can do
come
that.
down to 2 hours, right?
I got your question. I got your point. So what Chandra is saying, like, why can't we make it make it run parallel? So how to make code run parallel? Anyway, Spark is doing everything parallel by its own. But again, suppose we are writing our own logic and we want to make it parallel. How to do this? Any idea? Multi-threading, right? Every programming language supports multi-threading. You can use multi-threading to achieve all this, isn't it? You can do multi-threading to achieve that. You can write multi-threading code. In Python, you have multi-threading. In Scala, it is in Python it is called thread. Okay, threading.thread class, and in Scala it is futures and all this, right? So what I'm saying, like, you can. So what we can do is basically what we are saying here. We can do the we can write multi-threading code here. We can spawn these two threads parallelly. Okay, we can spawn these two threads parallelly. Okay, so just have a look in Python multi-threading code. So you can call two threads. Okay, so these will run in parallel. Okay, that's how basically things happen here. Okay, that is there. So, but yeah, if you don't write multi-threading code, and we always avoid writing multi-threading code, reason, any reason, is it a good practice to use multi-threading or not? There is no strict no, but still I see some problem. Anybody else also sees any problem here? The problem here is basically, so you have written the code considering the cluster capacity, how much of capacity you have, basis that you are specifying the number of partitions and all this, right? So that means, like, if you run multiple jobs parallel, so again the execution may be slower because you have written the code in such a way that it's utilizing the entire cluster bandwidth for your computation. Again, you are running the similar computation twice, so but cluster will not be doubled, right? Cluster capacity is still the same, so it will running in interleaving manner. First it computes something, then it take a pause, then it computes the second thing, or computes the entire thing in one shot, and then the second thing will start. In this way things will happen. Okay, that's why we have to carefully use the multi-threading in Spark code. Getting my point? You have to be always careful while writing the Spark code. Now, so that's basically one thing. But yeah, but if you don't write in multi-threading, it's always sequential. Okay, so lines of code will be executed in sequence. Which action appears first, that will be executed first. Which action appears second, that will be executed second. Which action appears third, so that will be executed third. Like that, things happen in this way. Okay, so that is there. And now, so that is there. Now you got my point. So this is how you can reduce the time. But again, that is an additional cost, as we discussed. Like, if you're caching it, you should make sure like you have enough memory to cache it. If you don't have, it will give memory error. You don't have enough memory. Okay, so that's there. Most of the time you don't have enough memory. You're processing hundreds of TBs of data. Definitely you don't have that much of RAM. It will never be able to cache it. It will fail. But luckily Spark has like identified this thing in the very beginning. It knows that most of the time it's not practically possible to cache this much of data. So for that, they have created different levels of caching. Okay, so caching is happening here in two different ways by using two different functions. One is called cache function, another is called persist function. Okay, persist function again has two variants: persist text without parameter and persist take a parameter, that is storage level. Okay, cache persist and persist takes the storage level. Persist take the storage level. Okay. So persist function takes two label. So the persist function which takes storage label, it has again three variants. You can specify memory only serialized, memory and disk, memory and disk serialized, and then disk only. Okay, like that. So we can specify any of these parameter inside persist function to say like we want to persist in this way or that way. Suppose memory only is exactly same as if you pass memory only with persist function, then all three are same. Cache, persist, memory only, all are same. Memory only serialized, it will compress the data and store it into the memory. Memory and disk, it will try to fit the data into the memory. If you have enough memory, fine. You will not get any means if it is fine. Else, if don't have enough memory, then portion of the data will be kept in the RAM and portion of the data will be written to the disk. Memory and disk serialized, same thing. First it will compress it, then try to fit into memory. If it is able to fit it, fine. If it is not able to fit, the rest of the data will be spilled over to the disk. Memory and only disk only. You know, like I am processing petabyte scale data, it's practically not possible to store the data into the memory. Let's keep it into the disk only. Still you get extra benefit. Suppose you compute it, it takes 2 hours, and you compute it and persist into the disk. So reading and writing disk, it may not take few minutes. Still you can get the performance of a caching level operation, isn't it? So these are a couple of points we need to keep in mind. Okay, so caching and persist function, and another function is called unpersist. Okay, suppose you cached some data. Okay, you cached some data and you did all these operations. Then later you can call rdd1.unpersist. You are explicitly saying, boss, remove that from the memory. Or else, like anyway, in the end of the code, you say spark session.close. Okay, the moment spark session.close, all these RDD's data frame which has been cached or registered to that spark session, they'll be automatically removed from the memory. Or else, like suppose you have 1,000 lines of code, you create a master data, and after creation, you know the next 100 lines of code, you make use of that master data. So then you used it. After that 100 lines of code, you can explicitly say that rd.unpersist to free up the memory, isn't it? That's how basically you can do the things. Okay, so that is there, and that is about your caching and persistence part. So let's go to the code. It's exactly same thing we are doing here. I think it has been changed. Memory only has been changed. It's now we should know how to Google search the problems also, right? No solution. I went to the next function, next suggestion. Let's see if I can get something. Looks like it's all getting Scala related suggestions. I'll add some additional keyword in my search. I like this tutorial point. And I'm saying memory only serialized. Here this one. I just copied it. And just pasted it. Okay, so it's a very small data having only 10, 12 records are there. So first time I just called take type take2 function, take action. Okay, this is my RDD. I read this log, mapped it to lowercase, filtered the errors only, and then I stored it into the memory, and I executed this. You will not see much difference here because it's a very small data, but working in larger data set, you will clearly see the difference. Here also you can see this took 0.69 seconds and this took 0.35 seconds, like half, because it really didn't compute this part because it's already there in the memory. Okay, so it becomes fast like that. Okay, that's about your caching and persistence. Okay, the question is basically what does this false true and all. So what you can see, here they are mentioning the storage level class having it's a constructor having these parameters: use disk, a boolean, use memory, boolean, use heap, boolean. All are like boolean flags. Okay, so memory only serialized means we are saying use disk false. No, we are not writing into disk. Use memory true. You can relate it here. Use off heap false. Then deserialized false. Deserialized false means memory, since we have called serialized, so deserialized is false. If it is normal memory only, it should be deserialized means I'm not sure, like this one you can just have to figure it out. Off if it's clear, it's saying off if false, and deserialized is also false. Replication equal to 1 default. Okay, so here also we're passing the default replication 1. Okay, so here we have passed 2, memory only underscore 2. That means we are saying keep the data as 2 copies in the memory. Okay, so for that we are explicitly passing replication 2 like that. Okay,
so this is like caching, right?
Correct. These are all caching only. These are all caching. So you're saying what level of caching you want. You want to store it in the memory, or you want to store it into the disk, or you want to store them in both, or you want to store them after compressing the data. All these attributes are specifying in this constructor, in this function call.
How do we know like which one to use?
Good question. Anybody having any other? This is a similar question. There's nothing very important, rather it's all our own heuristics. We know like on what cluster we are running the job, or the DevOps has already instructed you are basically submitting your job on this particular queue. Okay, in production systems you will see cluster is again divided into different queues. Otherwise what will happen now, a developer can run some experimental job which takes 10-20 hours or entire bandwidth, so rest of the jobs will fail. So that's why they divide the bandwidth into multiple queues. And different team use different queue to submit their jobs. Okay, there we know exactly how much of capacity we do have. Okay, basis that we decide like whether to keep the cache data in the actual cache in the memory, or partially memory and disk, or totally disk. All these things we have to decide. This is that.
Okay.
Got it?
Yeah.
So let's go to the next part. That is understanding the cluster topology. It's a very simple thing. I'll just quickly skim it through. So cluster topology we have already discussed. Like just the example is to show you the driver and worker program example. So cluster topology, what do you mean by that? I'm assuming most of the people are from computer science background. You might have heard about network topology in your networking paper, isn't it? So basically you have different ways to network computers together, isn't it? So you have peer-to-peer or bus. Sorry, this is point-to-point or peer-to-peer. This is bus. A single bus is connected with peripheral computers. Okay, so all these different, like this is a ring, this is star. So here basically we are using star topology. We have one master node and all worker nodes are connected to that, isn't it? So that's basically the star topology. Okay, so star topology is like this, and also, so that means the point is what we want to make here is basically all worker programs are getting executed by these worker machines, and if they return some value, like actions is the basically triggering point. If action returns some value, that return value will come to this particular computer's memory, but actual computations happen on these worker machines. So to demonstrate that, we have just created a very small example. Say we have this data like people data, name and age, and then we created a RTD out of it, and then we are splitting it through comma, and we are getting a RTD of list of values, and then we are calling for each function. Okay, inside for each function, we are printing that. Okay, we are saying print first element comma second element, and we are passing these values. Okay, so here you see like we are not getting any output. Okay, because you can see the job is executed successfully because for each is also an action. Okay, if you go to the PySpark thing, by documentation, you will see for each is also an action. But this action, whatever output it doesn't return any value. It's exactly same as map function. It applies some transformation one-to-one, like record by record, but it never returns any output. That's why it is called as an action. And you can think of like you have certain transformation to be applied, and that's the final step. You don't want to go further. Instead of calling map function, you can apply for each function also. Maybe after doing all these computations, you want to send this data to some API call, some RESTful API call, or you want to write it to some database. Okay, like that. These kind of operations you can do it in the for each function, but it doesn't return any output because the driver program didn't get any output, because for each function didn't return any value because it's an action and it doesn't return any value. So driver program didn't get any output, so it's not printing here. But I'm pretty sure if you go to the worker machine's logs, you will see all this output there, which we cannot access it here, but you visualize in this way. Okay, in the worker programs, if you go to the console, you will see these outputs there. But in the same case, when you are calling take function returns 2 records. Okay, since take function is an action and it returns a list of values, so driver program got 2 values, and that's what you're printing in the console here. Okay, so these are a couple of parts, and the next thing is basically map partitions and map partitions with index. So let's discuss that in the next session.